First, I'd like to thank the library for putting this together this evening. But just as important, all of you who were brave enough to show up to talk about the scariest places in Illinois from the safety of wherever you're watching this program from. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. So just bear with me 1 second here. And there we go. So all of you should be seeing the most haunted locations on your screen. If not, throw it in the chat room. The librarian can let me know. As you heard, my name is Chad Lewis, and I'll be your presenter for this program. And although my background is actually in the field of psychology, for the last nearly 30 years, I've been traveling the world in search of the strange and unusual. Everything from hunting for vampire legends in Transylvania, looking for the Loch Ness Monster, crop circles, UFOs, alien abductions, really, really scary people, some creepy places, you name it. If it's just a little strange and offbeat, I've traveled around the globe in search of these oddities, these weird anomalies and bizarre folklore. But what I discovered on my travels is that sometimes the weirdest things happen right in your own backyard. So that's what we're going to explore tonight. You can sit back and relax because for the next 45 minutes, I'll provide you everything you need. I'll give you the background, the folklore, the eyewitness accounts. I'll talk a bit about some of my research at these places. Heck, I'll even provide you with the directions to these places. But I'm going to leave it up to each and every one of you to travel to these places on your own and determine for yourself whether or not you believe they're haunted. So with that, let's explore some of the scariest and most haunted places that your state has to offer. And before we begin, just a word of caution that some of these stories tonight are going to be a bit creepy. Some of them might dwell in the macabre. So if that's not your sense of adventure, don't feel bad. At any time in the program, you can log out, go throw on a Hallmark Christmas movie, cleanse your palate, and not have to worry about any of these scary things. But for those of you who have stuck around, let's begin. Now, of course, when I talk about haunted places, a lot of people tend to think of cemeteries. And the reason being is quite simple. Cemeteries were thought to work as a portal between our world and the spirit world. So when your loved one passed on, it would just be easier for them to travel from our world to whatever world you believe they go to. But regardless of whether or not you believe this theory, there are many places around the state where it seems to be working in reverse. The living are not moving to the dead. The dead are coming into our world. First stop, Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside. This is a world famous cemetery, mainly because it's the final resting place of that little known gangster called Al Capone. But even though Capone's buried there, many people go there not to see Scarface, but to see a young woman that is known as the Italian Bride. It was in the early 1900s when she died while giving birth, and was the Italian custom of the time that she should be buried in her wedding gown. As you can see here, this is the gown she was buried in. But that's not the scary part. The scary part came that as soon as she died, her mother began having dreams in which the daughter came to her and said, "Mom, help me, save me. I'm alive. Dig me up. I can't breathe. Don't leave me here." So her mother did what any loving parent would do: petition the church and the graveyard to get permission to dig up her daughter. And her plan worked. The only problem was it took her 7 years to get this permission, but she still dug up her daughter and was amazed to find that even though the casket was rotting away, her daughter looked like she had been buried the day before. In fact, it was so creepy, they said, hey, let's take a photo of that and put that on the gravestone as well, which they did. You can see after 7 years in the ground, the casket's in horrible shape, but the young woman looks like she's merely sleeping. Once the story spread about the condition of this woman, people started seeing the ghostly spirit of a woman walking around in a bridal gown. She soon became known as the Italian bride. At first glance, people would think maybe she's getting married and paying her respects to her loved ones on her big day. That is, until she vanishes or disappears right in front of their eyes. And it's a great legend, a great piece of folklore. But is it anything more than an urban legend? Was anyone ever buried alive? Well, yes, we know thousands of people were buried alive. We know this because we have thousands of newspaper accounts from the 1800s and 1900s. Back then, whether you were in a diabetic shock or in a coma, doctors would often pronounce you dead. But lo and behold, many people, some of which were even at their own funeral, they would pop up just in the nick of time to be saved. This fear may seem silly to us with modern science and medicine, but our grandparents were so terrified, they came up with several inventions. My favorite is this. It's called a cemetery bell, and it did or does exactly what it looks like it would do. It was a bell that you could have above your grave with a rope going down into your casket. So if you awoke and found yourself buried alive, all you'd have to do is tug that rope. It would ring the bell and alert the caretaker who lived there that you had been buried alive and they could come and rescue you. The only problem with this invention, though, was on many nights, the wind would set these bells off, giving the caretaker quite a scare, thinking everyone had been buried alive. Now, after your loved one died, it was your responsibility to sit around their grave to make sure that they were not rising up from the dead. As evidenced by this photo, cemeteries in the old days were multifunctional. People had picnics there, family reunions. They went out there and hung out. They camped out there, spent the night. Today, most of our cemeteries are just memorials for our deceased. They're not as well used as they were in the old days. Or just head down the road a little bit to Peoria, the old state hospital here. Here you have the legend of a ghost named Old Book. And it was said that during every death of people in the hospital, Old Book would stand under a tree reading from a book to pay respect to their death. And then, of course, when he passed on and was buried in there, people would see him still under the tree, thinking that he rose up out of the grave and that he was there still watching over all the burials, even from the grave. And people have all sorts of experiences out at this mass cemetery as well. Even though a lot of the graves are unknown, many are unmarked, and a lot of the sufferers, their stories will never be known. But the bookbinder's not alone. In fact, one of the most ubiquitous legends throughout America is that of the vanishing hitchhiker. Usually a woman in white on the side of the road appearing at night for unsuspecting motorists. And in Illinois, the most infamous legend in your state is also a vanishing hitchhiker. And it deals with a young woman named Resurrection Mary. The story began back sometime pre-1930s at the Willowbrook Ballroom. There was a young girl by the name of Mary that was said to be at a dance there. And when the dance was over, she went home. And on the way home, she was involved in a car accident and died. Nobody knows if she was in a car or walking and struck by a car. But ever since that fateful evening, many people have claimed to have seen the ghostly image of a woman on the side of Illinois. At first glance, they thought maybe she broke down or needs some assistance. So they slow down, willing to offer her help, only to find that she's nearly transparent or vanishes right into thin air. Others swear that they've picked up this vanishing hitchhiker along Archer Avenue. And oftentimes she will be very quiet sitting in the front seat. And when they pass by Resurrection Cemetery, people notice she's vanished. But when they looked out toward the gates of the cemetery, her spirit is still there. One gentleman picked her up, saw her disappear, reappear out in front of the gates, and then grab the bars and walk right through the gates as though they were not there. After that story, they found these weird scorch or burn marks in the old gates. And even though the gates have been replaced, people still have experiences with Resurrection Mary. The old joke was that bars along Archer Avenue would keep a Bloody Mary drink out on their bar at night, just in case Resurrection Mary popped in, they would have something for her to drink. Now, of course, the Willowbrook Ballroom burned down recently. So what's going to happen to this spirit and this legend? I don't know. These stories always morph and progress as well. Right down the road from where a lot of you are watching this is the Evergreen Memorial Cemetery, thought to be haunted by many different spirits, including a man who appears to be out of the early 1900s that's walking through the cemetery. Others claim that there's a famous baseball pitcher haunting this historic cemetery as well. And they're not alone. Cemeteries everywhere not only have ghost stories, but a little bonus as well. You'll see what I mean here as we travel to Effingham, Illinois, to a place called Ramsey Cemetery. For decades, people have gone out here and seen mysterious balls of light, similar to this artist's rendition, floating through the cemetery. These balls of light change in size, shape, and color as they maneuver their way through the grounds. It was said years ago there was a chapel out here where you could go and pay your respects, have your funeral, and the like. That is until a young man went out there distraught with a shotgun, ended his own life, and took his suicide at the old chapel. Ever since that fateful moment, people would go out and claim that they would hear a gun blast going off, and they'd see what appeared to be blood oozing from the walls of the chapel. But when they went to touch it, it was dry to the touch. Eventually, the county thought it was a nuisance, and they tore down the chapel. That only increased the interest of people wanting to go out there. But the story gets even better than the haunted legend, because in order to get to this cemetery, which is in the middle of nowhere, you have to go down some back roads, some gravel, way through the woods. And it's here that many people have been going out to see the ghost when they look into some of the caves that are indented into the landscape to get to the graveyard. That's when they see something staring at them that shouldn't be there. Something that couldn't be there. But yet there it is, staring right back at them. So what are these witnesses seeing? Well, maybe I better let you just take a look. This creature, for lack of a better term, they call it a werewolf, the size of a bear, but shaped more like a wolf with the long muzzle, the deep, dark, matted down fur, the huge claws, fangs. To make matters worse, it appears to be a biped, running upright on its hind legs like you and I do. But again, don't feel bad. You're not the only people to believe in werewolves. Thanks to my good friend and colleague, Linda Godfrey, my home state of Wisconsin is now known as the werewolf capital of the world. Because much like Ramsey Cemetery, Linda started receiving reports of people traveling down a small stretch of road in Wisconsin called Bray Road. There, they encountered a very similar creature, often eating roadkill or freshly killed prey. Once Linda's books came out, I received reports from all over the US about these weird werewolf-type creatures. But what I think the good news is that outside of charging at a couple vehicles and ripping at car doors, these things seem to be just as afraid of witnesses as the witnesses are of them. And rather than try to attack and devour, they seem more likely to scurry back into the underbrush and try to remain undetected. So the good news is that if you go looking for these things, most likely you won't die. Well, 50-50, still pretty good odds when you're out werewolf hunting. Or maybe werewolves aren't your cup of tea. For that, maybe you head to Centralia, to Elmwood Cemetery. Here you have the tragic story of a young girl by the name of Annie. Annie was a member of a prominent family, and when she passed away, her family decided to honor her by putting a statue of her with her loved violin. It was said that she loved to play the violin. And once she passed on, people out in the cemetery swore that they heard phantom violin music being played. Some even claim they've seen the statue move and the phantom sounds making their way through the cemetery. When I first went there, I brought a ton of recording equipment with me, hoping that these phantom sounds would be played by Annie. Unfortunately, or knock on wood, maybe luckily for me, she did not make any noise while I was there. Bridges play an important role in the field of psychology and folklore and the paranormal. Much like they connect water with land here in our realm, many believe that they also connect our realm with the spirit realm, that they are a portal of some sort connecting worlds. And regardless of whether or not you believe this, there are many bridges in the state where weird things happen. In Monmouth, one of my favorites, a place called Crybaby Bridge. Now, every state seems to have at least a couple of these stories, and the legends are usually the same. There's an old bridge where tragedy struck, whether some kids were struck and killed by a runaway car, or someone went over into the water and met their watery grave, or in this case, a young woman, distraught, went out with her children and threw them over to their watery grave in the dark, cold, churning waters below. And now the legend is, if you're brave enough or foolish enough to make your way out there, when you park your car, you will hear the crying of that baby. At first, it'll seem like the baby's coming from under the bridge, the noise, the incessant crying of this baby. But soon it'll appear to be closer and closer until almost it feels and sounds like it's in your back seat. Others have seen the ghostly images of children in the water crying out like a siren, "Help me, save me, I can't swim, don't let me drown." Piece of advice is, if you do see those ghostly spirits, do not go in after them. Legend is they will pull you under, and you'll spend the rest of your eternity in the river along with the crybabies of Crybaby Bridge. Or perhaps you want to try your luck in Bartlett. Here you have one of the better known legends in all of the state, a place called Munger Road. It became even more infamous a few years back when they made a Hollywood movie about it, filmed on location. And the legend tells of there being some sort of accident on the railroad crossing. whether a busload of children, a van load, a car load, whatever it was. No one knows the exact origin. Like all good legends, the past seems to be, sketchy at best. But they all died when a train came rumbling by when they stalled out on the train tracks. Now, the legend tells that if you drive your car out there, weird things will begin to happen. Weird disembodied voices, odd lights, and the like. But the dare is, and a lot of these places have dares attached to them, that if you park your car on the train tracks here and put it in neutral, your car will be pushed uphill over the tracks by the spirits of those children who met their end so many years ago, and they are trying to avoid you meeting your own end on the railroad tracks. Many people will sprinkle baby powder or flour on the back of their trunk, and when they're pushed over, they claim that there are footprints or fingerprints or little handprints of these ghostly children that push them over. It gets even more bizarre because people claim that they've seen a phantom train out there as well. They can see the light coming. They can hear the engine rumbling. They can feel the train tracks vibrating as though something's coming, but the train never arrives. Years ago, this was a lonely back road, but today it's very busy. So if you're going to take this there, be very, very careful because it is extremely busy today. I would hate to have to put you in my next program as another casualty of Munger Road. And of course, it'd be impossible to do a program in Illinois without mentioning some president ghosts. As you know, Lincoln, one of the most beloved and popular presidents in America's history. And that's why many believe he continues to haunt many places in Springfield, including his former old house there, which is now part of the national park system. When I talked to park rangers, they were a little shy and embarrassed to be reported, but they reported all kinds of weird activity happens in the home. They'll come in the morning and get the place ready for tours and see that the rocking chairs often are rocking back and forth as though on their own. Many guests and staff have seen the ghostly image of a woman matching that of Mary Todd Lincoln walking through the building. Staff members told me that often while they're closing up, they hear somebody pacing back and forth, thinking that it's a tourist that didn't leave. They'll go to check it out, only to find the place is completely empty. No one can be found, at least not anyone who's alive, that is. But if it is the ghost of Lincoln haunting his former house, he seems to be busier in death than he was in life, because there are many places, not just in Springfield, that claim to be the final resting place of our former president. So, with Halloween fast approaching, many people like to get into the Halloween spirit of the season, which is why so many horror movies are so popular and so many haunted hayrides and parks where you can go and have costume people jumping out at you. But if you like this kind of entertainment, I highly recommend you head to one of the weirdest homes in the entire state of Illinois. It's in Mount Carroll, and it's the Raven's Grin Inn. And it looks like something out of a horror movie / Tim Burton movie. And it's a haunted house. And what I mean by that is its function is at a haunted house where you go and people will jump out and scare you, and props will bang out and try to spook you. But it's also done in a legitimate haunted house. This is the owner who's been doing it for decades. The house was haunted when he moved in, so he thought, why not make it a haunted house? One of the spirits that's often seen is that of the young girl who looks like she's a flapper girl from Prohibition era. because back during Prohibition, the house was used as a speakeasy where you could go and illegally drink and gamble and dance and maybe partake in one of the ladies of the night that worked there. And now, usually when people are down in the wine cellar where the speakeasy was, they've seen the ghostly image of that woman vanishing into thin air. Others have seen a weird ball of light shoot across the room, smack into the wall, and vanish. At first glance, they thought it was a special effect, telling the tour guide, "That's wonderful. How did you do that?" The tour guide usually has to tell them that it wasn't a special effect and that the place does seem to be actually haunted. A wonderful place to go, again, if you like that kind of macabre adventure. Raven's Grin Inn is one place you don't want to miss. With Halloween fast approaching, people love stories of monsters, werewolves, and witches. And Illinois is filled with witches, and not the Hollywood type of witches where they're all supermodels. These are the different type of witches. For that, we head to Chesterville Cemetery in Chesterville, but the locals, they call it Witch Cemetery. The legend is that a witch haunts this cemetery because, unlike the Hollywood version where I said they're all supermodels, this story tells of a young woman practicing the dark arts, witchcraft. In another version, she was speaking out for women's rights in this very conservative religious area. So the elders got together to stop her, and they stopped her by killing her and planting her grave in the graveyard and putting a tree over it. Now, many people think that trees were put above graves as a grave marker. And in some instances they were, but they were really meant to ground the person, that if you had the tree over them, nothing could happen. They could not rise up out of the ground. And we know there's a woman buried there, but records have been lost to history as to who's buried there. But she must have been pretty important or powerful, because not only did they put a tree over her grave, they also put an iron gate around her grave. And again, you might be thinking that the gate was put up to keep us out, but in actuality, iron gates were often put up to keep the spirit in. The belief was and is that ghosts cannot pass through iron. So if you had wronged somebody in life and were afraid they were going to come back and haunt you in the afterlife, you could put an iron bar on their casket or an iron gate around their grave. And now the legend tells that the witch haunts this cemetery, that if you go out there and touch the tree, especially at night, the spirit of that vengeful witch will chase you out of the graveyard. It is also said that if anything ever happens to the witch, whether the tree dies, it's cut down, or blown over in a storm, it will release the spirit of that vengeful witch, who will look for revenge on the families that took her life. Other people have seen weird balls of light. They've had all kinds of odd happenings while at this cemetery. But it's not the only witch in your state. If you head up north to Ashmore, you'll head to St. Omar's Cemetery, another one of these cemeteries out in the middle of absolutely nowhere, that if a cemetery should look like it's haunted, it's this one. And people believe that not only have they seen a witch wandering this graveyard, they believe they have evidence of this witch. So people will go out there and claim to hear people talking in the woods, but when they look around, nobody can be found. People claim they've been pushed or shoved by unseen spirits here. And of course, they've seen the witch. And the alleged witch is a woman by the name of Caroline. And people believe they have proof that she was a witch who murdered her family. And that proof comes in the death date on her grave marker. As you can see here, it is said she died February 31st, 1882. Now, it's very difficult to die on February 31st, even in a leap year. Many contend that it was a engraving error, too expensive to fix, just leave it. Where others believe it was done on purpose because Caroline was a witch. One legend in folklore tells that witches could only come back on the anniversary date of their death, the one night. So if you put February 31st as the date of the death, they could not come back and haunt you ever again. But if that's the reason it was done, it doesn't seem to be working because people see this witch all over the cemetery. Now, if you thought these previous cases were weird, and granted they were, these next cases are going to be beyond belief. Next stop, Collinsville, to the gates of hell, a series of 7 tunnels mainly under railroad tracks that are thought to lead to hell. And in fact, if it's said that if you go through a couple of these, and as evidenced by the amount of graffiti on them, you'll see people go out there, weird things will happen. You'll start to feel very warm. You might hear your name being called out. You'll see weird lights and shadowy forms. If you pass through 4 or 5 of them, people claim that you will then encounter the hellhounds of Collinsville. Hellhounds being large black dogs with glowing red or green eyes. They've been reported throughout history in many cultures on the planet. Many believe that they do the devil's bidding and that they are a harbinger of death. That if you see one of these things, much like hearing the Irish banshee, it means you or someone you know is going to die very shortly. But the story gets better. Don't stop there. If you're not mauled to death by the hellhounds, keep going. Because if you can make it through all 7 of the tunnels on one night, even better if you can stop at the last one at midnight, you'll see the reason for the hellhounds there. Because legend tells that hellhounds guard portals to hell. And that's exactly what is said to open up if you pass through all 7 of these gates. People who have seen it claim that they could feel an intense heat rising up toward them. They could feel the smoke and the fire coming toward them as well. Unfortunately, most of them didn't stick around long enough to find out if it really was a portal to hell. And of course, those who did, well, they're in hell right now. Most of the witnesses are a little shy and embarrassed about reporting it because they know how it sounds. A portal to hell in Illinois? But what they didn't realize is that over the last nearly 30 years, I've collected many stories in Illinois where a similar portal to hell is supposed to open up and swallow you in. In fact, I've collected so many of these, I'm just waiting for that national headline to come out. Illinois, portal to hell. Thank you. But if you'd rather not look into the underworld of the 7 gates of hell, I recommend you try a different way for some demonic activity. And for that, many of you are probably familiar with the novel and the movie Rosemary's Baby. But a lot of you might not be familiar with the Illinois version of that legend. And it brings us back to the Chicagoland area, to the Jane Addams Hull House on the university campus. When Jane Addams moved into the house, she believed it was haunted. She'd often see the ghostly image of a woman wandering through the place. Now, if you don't recall Jane Addams' history, she was a caretaker of the less fortunate, spent her life caretaking for those who did not have what she had, especially children. She was fond of children and helped many of them throughout her life. This is important to the legend because the legend states that many years ago in the early 1900s, a young woman became pregnant and she was very religious and wanted to put the Virgin Mary in her home. But apparently her husband, an atheist, saw the Virgin Mary, came home, threw it on the ground and said, "I'd rather have the devil as my child than to have this in my house." Seems a bit of an overreaction to me, but that's the way the legend goes. So fast forward a couple months and his wife gives birth. You probably know where this story's going because she doesn't give birth to a child, but as per her husband's request, a devil child. It was said to be born with red, flaky, scaly skin, that it had horns and a tail, claws on both his feet and its hands. It could walk and talk from the moment it was born, and it loved to smoke cigars and swear at people. As bizarre as that sounds, the legend is that the family had no idea what to do with this devil child, so they said, let's drop it off for Jane Addams to raise. And that's exactly what happened. In the early 1900s, busloads of people would knock on the door of Jane Addams' home day and night, begging to come in to see the devil child that she was said to be raising up on the second floor. In fact, you don't have to take her word for it. You don't have to take my word for it. You can take your own word for it because the place is open for tours. You can tour it. Try to find the devil child for yourself. Beware, many of the tours that go by in vans and walking tours, the haunted tours, they often stop in front of the house. Many people claim that they've seen the ghostly image of that devil child moving about up on the second floor. People have seen apparitions, taken photos, all sorts of strangeness on that second floor. You can kind of see here in the photograph on the far left corner is an old fountain. And just like the portals to hell in Collinsville, many believe that's a portal as well, as the fountain no longer works, but nobody wants to be next to it. Pardon me. Now, word of caution here. If there are any parents in the audience this evening, you're not going to like this next case. In fact, if you're not a parent, you probably won't like this next case. This is one of the worst cases I've ever discovered in all my years researching. And it involves a place in Cambridge called Death Curve. And the legend is that if you drive out to this curve, as many have for decades and decades, that there will be a ghost of a woman carrying a bloody axe that will appear in the middle of the road, chase your car off the road, you will crash and die, hence the term Death Curve. For decades, people wondered about why it would be haunted. Well, the story is even worse than the legend, because back in the 1800s and early 1900s, a family did live out on this property. They were the Markham family. And back in 1905, the mother, Julia Markham, went crazy. She snapped. She went psychotic, lost her mind. She sent her two oldest and strongest children off to go fetch wood and water for the day. When they were gone, one by one, she invited the 5 youngest children into the house, where she disposed of them with the axe. Once the 2 oldest children came back, they were treated to the same behavior. In a matter of moments, she had killed all 7 of her children. Then, almost as though snapping out of her trance, she realized what she had done. So she tried to slit her throat with a knife, but it didn't take. So she grabbed what she could of her children, gathered them together, what was left, and poured coal oil over them and herself and lit her house on fire. This is not her house. Neighbors caught wind of the fire, literally rushed over just in time to see young Julia coming out of the house looking like a charred Freddy Krueger. When they looked inside, they could see the remains of her children. Immediately, she denied what she had done, said it was a traveling salesman that was responsible. But when the local doctor showed up and assured her that she was not going to make it, she admitted to all of the murders of her family. Since that time, people believe the farmland has been cursed I talked to several women who back in their high school days in the 1980s remembered coming out to the farmland, seeing weird balls of light hovering along this old fence line of the farm. Every time I've gone there, I brought my hatchet along, trying to entice the spirit of Mrs. Markham to make her way out. Luckily or unluckily for me, she has not appeared. But the story gets even better. And the story tells that if you walk back onto the land of their farm, you will see their phantom house that will appear. Again, this is not their house. It will appear out of nowhere. The legend is that if you're foolish enough to go into the house, you will not come out of the house. Several people claim they've seen the house, but I've never met anyone who claimed that they've been in the house because obviously they didn't make it out. But if you make it off of the property, don't leave the area quite right away. Right down the road is the historic cemetery. Now, this cemetery is a spot where many people will see what appears to be the ghostly images of young children running around, wondering why the children are out at such times of the night or such hours, or why they're not properly dressed for the harsh conditions. They look around to find no children are there. Others told me they didn't see any children, but they heard laughing, giggling, playing, as though children were having a great old time. But when they looked around, nothing but fields and gravestones. There may be a reason why so many people have an experience here. What was left of the Markham children, their charred remains were all gathered and buried in an unmarked grave here, just to the right of the main photo here. What was left of their murdering mother was buried right next to them in another grave. Due to finances, they did not have the amount of money necessary for separate graves for all the children. Now, in some versions of the story, the father committed suicide after coming home and recognizing what he had done, what his wife had done. Many of the newspapers say that he took a rope and ended his own life out in the barn while lighting it on fire. But that story and that legend is false. The father moved away, stayed in Illinois, remarried, but never had more children, and lived what appeared to be an uneventful rest of his life. Many believe this was one of the most haunted cemeteries of the area, and for good reason. As I'm running low on time this evening, I'm going to end with the type of case that you haven't heard me talk about tonight, because it's a private home. And I put this up the last of our cases for two main reasons. One, out of all the people that contact me about a ghost story or haunting, the overwhelming majority of them contact me believing that their house is haunted. Some of them, they think they know who's haunting it. They smell grandma's perfume on the anniversary of her death, or they see Uncle Charlie walking around. Some have no idea who or what could be haunting their place. Believe it or not, many of them are okay with it. They become accustomed to it. It doesn't bother them. Others would rather leave as fast as they could. And they all report very similar things happening. Mysterious knocking on their doors and windows, electrical problems. When they go out for the evening and come back, things have been rearranged. Objects go missing and then reappear in the most obvious of places. Things move on their own as though thrown by some unseen force. Weird apparitions, weird smells, all kinds of odd noises throughout the house. And I put this up last, as I mentioned, one, because it's the most common report I received, but two, I hope this one sticks with you. I hope you take this story with you this evening, because later tonight, when all of you head to bed and you put your head down on your pillows and you hear the wind rustling outside your window, I want you to ask yourself, is it possible, just maybe, that wasn't the wind howling outside your window, and maybe you too are living in a haunted place? So with that, I wanted to save the last 10 minutes or so that we have for any questions, comments, or stories that any of you might have. If you want more information, my website has more than you could ever want or need at Chad Lewis Research. But I hope your adventure doesn't end here at the program. Grab one of my books, go on your own adventure of Illinois. And when you do, I think you'll discover that you live in one heck of a weird state. And I mean that in a good way. You're going to see things you've never seen. You'll meet some weird people. And along the way, you might just discover that the strangest thing out there is often yourself. So with that, I again want to thank the library for putting this together. Very rare you can come to a program like this at no cost. You can check out a wealth of information from the library, a real treasure for any community that has one. So just to show my appreciation, if you want to go to my website and get any of my books, type in the coupon code library. You'll save 20% off just because the library is so amazing. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll turn it over to the library. If you have questions or stories or comments, you can throw them in the chat room or unmute yourself. And otherwise, you're going to let me off the hook way too easy tonight. You're muted.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chad. As you were speaking, I know that many other Illinoisans grew up hearing about the Resurrection Mary. That was the only one I was familiar with, so I learned a lot. And with that, I'd like to open up the floor to anyone else who has questions or their own recollections of haunted Illinois.
And while people are getting their questions started, Resurrection Mary is one that I used to keep out of my program because I figured everybody knew about it. And every time I did not put her in my program, people said, why didn't you talk about Resurrection Mary? So I've added her in. She seems to be Illinois' favorite ghost daughter, if you will.
Nancy wonders if you've ever heard about the David Davis Mansion, which is here in Bloomington, being haunted.
I've heard stories. I've never been there, which every place you heard me talk about tonight or that I write about, I actually visited. But I know it was included in a book on a haunted Bloomington by History Press that you can get if you're interested. But I would love to hear stories because I haven't been there. And I think it illustrates that I've been doing this nearly 30 years. There's not one program where I don't learn a new place or a new story or a new legend. So I don't know any offhand, but I would love to hear more because, again, I'm always adding to my legends. And I figure if I do this another 30 years, there won't be one place in the Midwest that doesn't have a legend attached to it.
I'm not familiar with the David Davis Mansion's haunting story, but I can tell you that the book that Chad is talking about, we have several copies at the Bloomington Public Library. If you would like to read about haunted Bloomington Normal, we do have that book. So that's a good place to start if you'd like to develop your own ghost tour.
And keep in mind, this is just the tip of the iceberg. You can't throw a rock in Illinois without hitting a place that has a supernatural reputation. And this is just ghosts. Imagine when we throw in monsters, like if you head down to Murfreesboro, Illinois, you might be able to see the Big Muddy Monster, a giant Bigfoot-like creature that roams the area of Little Egypt. And if you're a Prime member on Amazon, you can watch a colleague and friend of mine, Joe Turi's new documentary called Creature from Big Muddy, all about the Illinois Sasquatch. So again, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Nicole wonders if you've heard about Moon Point Cemetery in Streeter, Illinois.
Yes, a great old cemetery. And one of those, my colleague Kevin Nelson grew up in Streeter, and one of those where all sorts of weird things happen, from the ghostly image of a woman crying over her child, like La Llorona, to people seeing a young child crying as well, almost like a crybaby bridge. So Moon Point seems to be one of those where a lot of people go there and they have a lot of experiences when they do go there.
We've got a couple other questions. Kathy wants to know if you've heard about Magical Mystery Lane in Jacksonville, Illinois, which I think there was an institution in Jacksonville. I think there's haunting stories about Jacksonville in another place too. And Nancy is wondering about Dogman or Mothman stories in Illinois.
Well, yeah, let me start with the dog man. Just because the dog man seems to be, by all counts, most people would probably think it's a werewolf type figure, like the Ramsey Cemetery werewolf, where sometimes people who see the dog man think it's a less muscular, more of a slight build. And of course, where werewolves are half human at points and then transform into werewolves, the dog man is seemingly dog man the entire time. But for most accounts, if you see this large bipedal thing running upright next to your car, you're not going to say, is that a dog man or a werewolf? What's going on here? But there are cases of werewolf type sightings, as I said, and dogman and thunderbirds, where Mothman like creatures, these giant birds that are just too big to be any known animal. And there was an infamous one in Lawndale where a young boy claimed that he was almost carried away by this bird. When this family saw two of these gigantic birds circling the house, one swooped down and grabbed him and was lifting him off. And the parents had to wrap their arms around him and pull him down. So we do get reports of these giant bird-like Mothman creatures and dogmen or werewolf sightings as well, which is odd because I think a lot of people can at least imagine that there might be a Bigfoot creature undiscovered to science. But when you start getting into, Mothmen and dogmen and werewolves, people have a harder time believing that there are werewolves living out in the woods, at least flesh and blood ones like a bear or a moose, where, I think the believability of some of these things goes down from most people thinking of Bigfoot or Sasquatch. And those are the types that I love. The weirder and more bizarre, those are the stories I love. Like the deer man in Illinois and Kewaunee. You have this deer man that haunts a state park in Kewaunee, where if you see him 3 times, you'll die, which I don't know why people want to see a deer man 3 times, but that's the legend. So yes.
Barb wonders, does every place that have a tragedy happen there have supernatural occurrences in your experience?
It seems to be. Now, the overwhelming majority of cases I receive, as I said, are from people who think it's a loved one, and they take comfort and solace in that. But that's not the stories that fascinate the general public. That's not the stories that the media portrays. They love thinking of these stories of mishap, misfortune, and death, suicides, untimely accidents, mob hits, serial killers. Those are the things that we think are tied to these hauntings. But I think that's just because, for me, they're the most fascinating and bizarre. But certainly that's not the only type. Much like many people have these experiences in broad daylight. It's not only at night when Hollywood pretends it is, that these things happen to people who are not actively looking for them. They're just going about their day-to-day routine when something bizarre happens to them.
And one last question, then we'll let you go because I know we're almost out of time. Beth wonders if you've heard about any legends regarding the soldier and sailor home or orphanage that was here in Bloomington Normal.
I haven't. I would love to hear more as well. And again, it's probably in a local book that the library has, but I would love to hear more of that one as well. And these stories, not only do you have the old historic ones, but there's new ones popping up every day of new legends happening. And that's part of the fun, is observing how these things morph and progress. But yeah, email me, contact me. My website has all my contact, whether you want to email, call, or old fashioned write a letter.
Thank you so much, Chad. And for everyone, please take a look at Chad's website and check out his books, or if you want to submit to him your own haunting story, I'm sure he'd be happy to hear from you. And I hope that you all have a very uneventful, unless you would like it to be otherwise, spooky season. Thank you all so much for attending tonight. Chad, thank you very much. And I'm sending you an email right after we've wrapped this up.
Thank you, and keep an eye out.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening.